Good afternoon. Rhyme of the Times 2022 Review of the Year. Part 1, Life in the UK. Act 3, Temperature rises, rising prices, interest rises, NHS crisis, MPs vices, government misers when it comes to the sizes of pay rises. At the start of the year, the national chat was still Omicron this, Omicron that. COVID still dominated much conversation across the world as well as our nation. Even the L word was being mentioned, but lockdowns were never Boris's intention. Social division still cultivated by issues such as the unvaccinated. As with many things, the government backtracked on the plan to have unjabbed NHS staff sacked. Pretty obvious that the idea would not serve us, crippling further an understaffed health service, and several head teachers and several schools dragged their feet on lifting COVID rules. But Boris was ahead of Europe's curve in defying the doubters and keeping his nerve. This bloody disease had caused him enough grief, he was determined to turn over a new leaf. And by Easter he'd got the damn thing shifted, with all travel restrictions finally being lifted. The year's events in Britain transpired to the sound of the rhythm of COVID waves in the background. Despite the alarm of the odd sporadic surge, normal life returned and scaremongering was purged. But 2 years of so much social distance had done strange things to immune systems. Flu and colds were more common and severe as we drew towards the end of the year, and a lack of viral exposure, some experts say, could also explain autumn's outbreak of strep A. And there were viral problems for our feathered friends. Avian flu brought many to premature ends, and for some people this led to pre-Christmas scares, as eggs and turkeys were becoming scarce. In the November news, COVID made a comeback. A comprehensive inquiry opened to establish facts. It will last longer than the pandemic itself and will focus on Britain, but not just on our health. From the government's purchase of PPE to lockdowns and the odd illicit party, they'll want to find if the government bungled, though the inquiry began with Matt in the jungle. With the warmest ever New Year's Day, it had been a mild winter in the UK. Then in February, Dudley battered the north. Very soon after, Eunice showed her force. Since its construction, we'd not seen a storm to shred the roof of the O2 Arena. Defences were powerless, homes without power, whole areas cut off for hour after hour. Franklin was the third to hit us in 4 days, a hat-trick of storms to strike the UK. Damage, destruction, anger and invective, but the hardship was soon put into perspective. The inconvenience caused by the UK rain seemed petty 2 days later when bombs rained on Ukraine. In the summer we had a few heat waves, the Met Office in meltdown to have lives saved. For at least 2 weeks the warnings came that the country was going to be aflame. Basic advice each day they would spout: slap on the sun cream, don't go out. And later we were told we had a drought. A drought of common sense is what they meant, no doubt. On the 19th of July, the mercury reached a record height, 104.5 degrees Fahrenheit. In English money, that's 40.3 degrees in a Lincolnshire village by the name of Coningsby. The British conversation is often about the weather, and many conversations this year were about weather. 2022 would be the hottest we've ever had. The answer is yes, which I guess is pretty bad. On January the 10th, Levelling Up Minister Michael Gove didn't reach the level to which he strove. He'd come to the BBC to give his handle on government plans re the Grenfell scandal. But more high-rise problems meant he missed his chat. He got stuck in the lift, and that was that. And as we stand now, Mr. Gove is still stuck getting movement in this tragedy. He's had no luck. In November, the inquiry conclusions were read. The 72 deaths were avoidable, it said. There remains a merry-go-round of blame for why people perished in those flames. From the instant Russian tanks entered Ukraine, oil and gas prices started to gain. The Ofgem cap blew off energy prices, inflating the cost of living crisis, £700 onto annual energy bills, the rise kicking in from the 1st of April. Then Rishi Sunak, again right on cue, performed another financial rescue. A £150 handout from the state in the form of a council tax rebate and a kind of £200 loan to ease the upcoming household fuel bill squeeze. And that set the general direction of travel. Tory plans for a small state began to unravel. More reluctant interventions had to be made. Even Truss provided some government aid during her stopover at Number 10. Most of the country was very anxious by then. Since August, a number was seared in our mind, 3,549. That was the total pounds of the new energy cap, expected to put many in a poverty trap. The perilous state of the British state meant great hope was pinned on Sunak's spring statement. Disposable income had been seriously decayed by inflation at levels not seen for decades. Hardship, Rishi seemed to pooh-pooh that notion, taking 5p off a litre, a p in the petrol ocean. Sunak for days was at pains to explain that he really honestly understands people's pain. But opposition politicians were less than impressed. Much of the nation was left rather depressed. The Chancellor pleaded in his defence that the crisis is due to external events. He can't prevent the war or control fuel prices, and he wasn't the one who caused the cost of living crisis. And so Rishi's star was starting to plummet from the height of COVID when it reached its summit, and he continued to get attacks on attacks. A windfall tax was one Sunak wouldn't back. He was opposed to taking away some pennies from the well-off oil and gas companies. Labour told the government, come off it, you can't just keep letting the rich profit. But they couldn't win with the windfall tax, and the same was true with the sinful tax. That's how critics see pay packet diminution through hiked national insurance contributions. The proposed increase for April the 1st would make the cost of living a whole lot worse. And in April, Rishi had another taxing affair, being asked if his wife being non-dom was fair. He said it was private and so it should remain, but others thought his job means it's for the public domain. She hasn't broken any rules, but some still say she should pay her foreign taxes in the UK. And then people ask, why for 6 years has Rishi kept a US green card while being an MP? Then calls for a windfall tax turned into a yell with the huge profit reports from BP and Shell. The government still insisted, no way, higher profits means more tax revenue anyway. They didn't want to upset the industry bosses who during the pandemic suffered huge losses. It may also make them less inclined to put resources into developing much needed new energy sources. And as inflation reached double figures, doom merchants predicted it would get even bigger. The Bank of England reacted to these signs, pushing the base rate to the level of 2009. The new base rate figure of 1% was the rate 6 months after the crash of 2008. And as we now know, the interest rate would be 3.5 times that by 2023. Another unwelcome record beater, petrol prices almost reached £2 a litre. Filling the tank for many people was killing, as all the while food banks kept on filling. More backbench unrest in late May followed. Rishi came to the Commons with humble pie to swallow, finally agreeing to a £400 energy handout. That's red meat to socialists, some Tories cried out. And how would it be funded? Yes, you've guessed, an oil firm windfall tax. But the Chancellor stressed it's a temporary, targeted energy levy. Words to make the burden feel less heavy. Some Tories got twitchy at how easily Sunak flexed, wondering what U-turn would be coming next. In November, Hunt increased the windfall tax. We now wait to see how the industry reacts. And Kwasi reversed the national insurance rise, but of course, soon after that, he faced his demise. What was perhaps more of a surprise, Jeremy Hunt didn't reverse the reverse in the rise. In February, the London mayor seemed not optimistic that he could continue to opt for Mystic. Sadiq Khan gave a list of demands to be met for Cressida Dick to stay head of the Met, but clearly he'd lost faith in Miss Dick, so she wrote her resignation pretty damn quick. Sir Mark Rowley in July picked up her baton, faced with many troubles that Dick seems to have sat on. Northern Ireland has given Westminster some troubles. For years and years it has simmered and bubbled. The 1998 peace accord had suppressed years of political discord. It seems that now the Brexit decision has started to expose again these divisions. Northern Ireland's Assembly had two big spaces, which had caused nearly a year of political stasis. February's resignation of the First Minister over the way Brexit is being administered meant that the Deputy had to go too. The rest were left working out just what to do. With Paul Givan and Michelle O'Neill having gone, Westminster wasn't sure what was going on. 5th of May and local elections in the UK, bad for the Tories, for Labour okay. The Liberal Democrats really excelled. In Northern Ireland, the Unionists didn't do well. A united Ireland could be on the cards again after an overall marginal win for Sinn Féin. Shared power was the outcome of the Good Friday deal. It should have been led by Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill, but then we learnt that the DUP was refusing to provide a deputy. They will not be playing ball, they said, until the Irish sea border is knocked on the head. Sinn Féin said their country won't be held to ransom. The DUP's stance would cause troubles, and then some. And the UK had still moved no nearer towards a solution about Irish soft and hard borders. Johnson and Truss seemed to be pretty trussed. No room for manoeuvre with nobody's trust. The PM wanted to change the Brexit deal, but the EU said it was all signed and sealed. New legislation they wouldn't let him pass, and so continued the chasmic impasse. And then America got all upset that the Good Friday Agreement was now under threat. In mid-May, the Speaker of the House stated if the protocol is repudiated, any US-UK trade deals would be put into a state of jeopardy. Downing Street countered that Miss Pelosi was being over-dramatic and maybe a bit nosy. In July, the government, with a last throw of the dice, tried to break the Northern Ireland Protocol ice. We would opt out of the bits of the Brexit deal that, for Britain, were unwanted or not ideal. The Vice President of the European Commission, not surprisingly, took a different position. There is no legal or political justification for any selective Brexit or abrogation. 17th of February, P&O ferries were in the dock with their business heading for the rocks. 2 years of COVID took the wind out its sails. Restricted sailing meant restricted sails. So 800 seafarers were sacked on the spot. A video call told them, that's your lot. And so P&O ferries seemed to run aground. Boss Peter Hebblethwaite gave reasons unsound. By not consulting with the workforce before, he admitted he had indeed broken the law. And there were many other traveller problems. With COVID on the wane, we thought we'd stop them. It wasn't visas and bureaucracy causing this stress, but unintended consequences causing distress. Adding to a picture that we just can't escape, that the travel business is in pretty bad shape. For 2 years, COVID restrictions had wrecked her holiday travel and transport sector. Suddenly in April, there was a perfect storm, and the weather was the only thing sticking to the norm. Spring is when the UK climate improves. This year COVID rules had just been removed, so inevitably as the Easter holidays began, pent-up demand smashed through the COVID dam. Damn, said unprepared travel bosses with holes in their payroll from lockdown job losses. And then just to add to the bank holiday mix, maintenance work had train users in a fix. And there was also trouble in the airports, frustrated travellers of all sorts. EasyJet making jetting everywhere hard. Tourist staff issues catching them off guard. And in the summer, out of Dover, long queues stretched. The French blame Brexit, the British blame the French. In 2022 in the UK, political tittle-tattle was never far away. The Mail in late April caused a furore, quoting the opinion of an anonymous Tory. Their article told its 2 million readers that Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, was using frontbench leg crossing actions, crossing Boris's eye line, causing him distractions. While Labour talked of Westminster male stereotypes, Boris said the article was misogynist tripe. Once again, though, national debate was ignited about how men's sexism needs to be righted. Some weren't just angry at male attitudes, but were equally angry at the male's attitude. Its editor was called to meet with Lindsay Hoyle in defence of free speech. David Dillon did recoil. Russian press is gagged by a dangerous president. Britain should avoid a similar dangerous president. On Friday came more parliamentary sleaze. Shame on another of our elected MPs. For red-faced Neil Parish, this was his take. It was just a very embarrassing mistake. This response was received with widespread scorn. I mean, the guy had been caught in the Commons watching porn. The 65-year-old was on his phone scrolling through scenes of domination and sexual controlling. The Devon farmer couldn't convince his detractors he'd been looking for a site that sold new tractors. With the public, his tale gained little traction for them. It was more like Fatal Attraction. So on Saturday, Parish decided to resign for the rude awakening he'd got in work time. For female MPs, it vexes them that Westminster is rife with sexism, male behaviour and attitudes straight from the ark, more dinosaurs in the Commons than Jurassic Park. May 24th saw the opening of Crossrail, making some cross and others rail. Outside of the southeast, it doesn't mean much, apart from maybe that London's out of touch. The whole country benefits, politicians claim, but cities elsewhere get no shiny new trains. The town of Reading, however, will do fine being at the end of the new Elizabeth line. Elizabeth's journey's taken 13 years, with delays whenever the destination looked near. Overdue by 4 years, maybe 5. Elizabeth still hasn't fully arrived. The CEO had talked of complexities off the scale which caused the timetable to go off the rails, and the cost also went way off track. £4 billion over budget is a fair old whack, but it is an impressive engineering feat and will be first class when finally complete. For now it's 3 parts running separately. The line will be joined in 2023. Most other railway news that we tended to hear was industrial action for half of the year, and as 2022 ended its final week, the chances of resolution were still looking bleak. It's about working practices as well as pay and safety and job guarantees, the unions say, but the employers don't see things the unions way, and the government won't step in to save the day, and the unions say the government must be involved if they want this dispute to be resolved. For 6 months the negotiations have been very slow, and the trains have often been no show or no go. Network Rail and rail bosses continue to say the industry is losing big bucks every day. COVID has meant their coffers are empty. There's no more to offer, the RMT. They say the railways aren't on the right lines, delaying all efforts to keep up with the times, but the RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch has a position from which he just won't flinch. Meanwhile, Keir Starmer was told to get a spine when he banned shadow ministers from picket lines. The Unite Union leader thought Labour should unite and stand firmly behind the workers in their fight. And as the rail strikes continued to drag on, many others jumped onto the bandwagon. Postal workers wouldn't post them and wouldn't sort them. We could soon have a post office post-mortem. With each postal strike, on the roads came a flood of courier drivers smelling the postman's blood. The fact is, the internet's transformed our culture. Now the courier firms are circling like vultures. And that's also the danger with the train strikes. Working from home, buses, cars, even bikes are all ways of circumnavigating the train when the disputes are settled. Will any punters remain? While unions focus on pay and unsociable shifts, bosses prepare for long-term societal shifts. But some services, of course, have no substitute. The pain caused by NHS strikes was more acute. For months, the RCN tried with no luck at all to get the government to stop playing hardball. Their mantra every time talks were ended or suspended: "We'll agree with whatever the pay bodies recommended." So, on the 9th of November, nurses finally took the plunge. For many, all lingering doubts were now expunged. The ballot was held and a majority put their entry. That meant they would strike for the first time in a century. 2 strikes before Christmas, more still ahead, until a deal is done to put the matter to bed. Being Health Secretary is no easy gig. NHS ills provide a list that's very big. And with an ageing population, is there anybody who can devise a properly costed social care plan? Javid and Coffey this year tried their luck to sort out a department that many think is not doing very well. Twice Steve Barclay got the hospital pass, a glutton for punishment, a neck of brass. Having brassed off the sector, the question now asked, can he offer NHS staff the requisite brass? And it's not just to improve current staff retainment, but also for recruitment target attainment. With an eye on the big picture, the government says the floodgates will open if they give just one yes. Big pay rises kill the economy, they claim, because whatever wages do, prices do the same. Wages chase prices. Prices chase wages, like a dog chases its tail for ages. But the other side of this complicated story is that the chickens have come home after 12 years of Tories, roosting on a decade of downward motion of real term pay and living standards erosion. Austerity should no longer be the answer, even in a COVID and Russian-made disaster. Because even if external factors are to blame, it doesn't help the poor patients suffering in pain. We move on now to the government's big plan to solve a migrant problem that's got out of hand. Their idea was that a plane to East Africa would break the business model of the human trafficker. In April, Patel said their services would be abandoned if their clients knew they'd end up in Rwanda. The then Home Secretary's logic was thus: the migrants boarding the boats to join us would think again and stop off well before they got anywhere near France's seashore. She said France is where migrants can start life anew, or any other of the countries that they pass through. But there is varied and nuanced motivation behind choosing Britain as a final destination. It helps the cause, though, for the right-wing mob to depict these migrants as an homogeneous blob. And the question was, would this plan solve the problem? Would it scare the migrants? Would it actually stop them? Patel's logic was simple, pretty black and white, while many critics said it was just not right. Church leaders claimed that the plan was immoral. Human rights lawyers had their highbrow quarrels. Ministers, though, regarded them as irritating, not problem solvers, just pontificating. In June, the first Rwanda plane was all set to go when the ECHR intervened, saying no. It was getting very late on a Tuesday evening when an injunction stopped the plane from leaving. Britain's Supreme Court had been overpowered by a European court at the 11th hour. While Patel was desperate to have the plane gone, human rights lawyers thought it was just plain wrong. The British court would still have the final say, but for the moment this injunction was in the way. On the 9th of June, the High Court had decreed the first deportation to Rwanda could proceed. A week later, the Supreme Court laid out its position. There was no legal reason to change this decision. There was, however, one overlooked issue. The verdict was subject to judicial review, and so the European Court of Human Rights said the judicial review must decide on these flights. And since then, there has been legal toing and froing. It's still not clear if the flights will be going. Braverman recently said of the scheme, a plane full of migrants sent by Christmas was her dream. But the legal nightmare remains, which means many still tell the Home Secretary, in your dreams. And in late October, people were asking, how did Manston Migrant Centre get so overcrowded? 4,000 people were in the facility in Kent, more than double the capacity for which it was meant. Squalor, fighting and disease were rife for people fleeing an even more desperate life. But some say that some have no need to be here, like the massive influx from Albania. The Albanian Prime Minister Edi Rama then fueled a rise in diplomatic drama, suggesting the British government needs to be truthful, saying facts are crucial, respect should be mutual. Then a guy threw 3 bombs and was found dead later. No one else was killed by this migrant hater. Meanwhile, 46,000 in small boats have come, 65% more than in 2021. But just talking in numbers is wrong, some would say. We're talking about human lives at the end of the day. In July, while Sunak and Truss were on the trail to find the key to the Tory Holy Grail, another duel was taking place in a London court as 2 high-profile wags had some business to sort. They both swore to tell the truth while holding the Bible, then tried to find who had lied in this case of libel. The final result was Colleen beat Rebecca Vardy, which left the Leicester City player's wife slightly mardy. Gun crime in London dropped this year, but for the rest of the country there was no cheer. Most police forces reported an escalation, and there were several incidents that shocked the nation. The killing of Olivia Pratt-Corbell made most headlines in Liverpool in August because she was only 9. She was at home when a man came inside and he shot 4 times and Olivia died. 10 days of mourning for the Queen in September as her life of 96 years was remembered. For more than 4 days she was lying in state. Thousands of people didn't care how long they'd wait. 12 or more hours they were there for the long haul, for those precious moments in Westminster's big hall. The Brits could make queuing an Olympic event, but this queue also had many of foreign descent. Across the world, the feeling of loss seemed so real, such was the Queen's universal appeal. The Queen's queue closed Sunday night to allow time for those in line to meet the deadline. 19th of September, 6:30 in the morning, the last one viewed the coffin as the day was dawning. Then world attention switched to Westminster Abbey with its guest list that was none too shabby. Most world leaders received invitations except those of a few notorious nations. Putin was spurned, and it seems he wasn't best chuffed. Immoral is what the Kremlin called his rebuff. Bigwigs were afforded no deference or fuss. Many reached the service in a communal bus. Biden used a car to swerve potential attack, arrived late and so sat 14 seats back. The coffin had arrived at around 11 a.m, accompanied by an array of servicemen, poured on a state gun carriage drawn by 142 naval guys. The major royals marched behind. The bagpipes and drums stirred body and mind. The procession took 15 minutes in all to make it to Westminster Abbey from the hall. The Queen's planning was all over the proceedings. She had chosen the music, hymns and the readings. The Archbishop of Canterbury gave his sermon, saying the Queen, from a young age, determined that her faith and service to the nation came first, and throughout her life that was never reversed. And then as he gazed to the And then, as his gaze to the congregation was cast, he tellingly made reference to the massive contrast between the Queen and those that cling to power, who after their death are forgotten within hours. A nod to some despots present in the aisles, eliciting from others sanctimonious smiles. In the afternoon, the final journey for the Queen, the route to Windsor, another right royal scene, then committal in the castle with final thoughts, before the coffin was lowered into the family vault. Leicester this year suffered weeks of unrest, though the Queen's death meant it had been quite suppressed. Muslims fighting Hindus, religious tensions aflame, sparked by an India v Pakistan game. But was it really a cricket match that was to blame? More social media agitators making false claims. In 2021 there was a national census. Here's a result to discuss and make sense of. If we take the last census as authority, Britain is no longer a Christian majority. In April came news about driverless cars. For many people, it's a step too far. We'll all be travelling with a remote in our hand, because watching TV on the road won't be banned. And talking of the small screen, what was this? Customers streaming away from a streaming business. Netflix, after a decade of unwavering success, said its UK subscribers are 1 million plus less. Lockdowns ending and the cost of living getting worse caused a third being knocked off Netflix total worth. The long passage of the online safety bill continued through the year and is moving still. The law rarely keeps pace with the world of tech. While the law moves slowly, more lives are wrecked. Sadly, these things can't be done in haste, with so many sensitive matters to be faced. Balancing the protection of internet users from mind-bending exploitation and sexual abusers with the need for free speech to be preserved, as well as the virtues that virtuality can serve. So, hopefully next year we will have in place laws that make the internet a less harmful place. Scotland had its own bill reaching the final stage, and it is also one that reflects a changing age. The Gender Recognition Reform Bill means anybody who is at least 16 can apply for a GRC more simply, without reassignment treatment or payment of a fee. Hopes of Scottish independence suffered a blow in November when the Supreme Court said no to a referendum on Scotland's secession without the British Parliament giving its blessing. So as we reach the end of this review of Britain in 2022, here's a final recollection for those that treasure their vinyl collection. Vinyl outsold their CD counterparts in the British record selling charts. The first time it's been so in 35 years. Now that's what I call music to the ears.